All right, guys, here we are with civil rights. We are going to cover your civil rights unit as short as possible. We're only going to focus on the things that you're absolutely going to be tested over. But in order to do that, we really do have to cover the things that you've already learned because they connect to what you're learning right now. So backtrack. What do we know so far? We know that we have specific groups that we have been hitting in every single unit almost, and that is going to be your Native Americans, your Asian Americans, women, Hispanic Americans, and African Americans. Those are going to be your major groupings, okay? Now, with the Native American, we have covered the Dawes Act, which is assimilation, right? Kill the Indian, keep the man. Make the Indian dress and act and do things like the Europeans do. And one of the things that the Europeans do is they do not farm as a collective. The Europeans farm separately, okay? And so when they get, when we move the Native Americans onto the reservations, which is land that is not in great areas, very sparse vegetation, and we throw them over there, we want them to farm their land as individuals, not within the collective. And that's really going to be pushed by the Dawes Act. We have the citizenship. They gained their citizenship in 1924. And then we have AIM here in current civil rights, which is them focusing on gaining Native American rights. Anytime you see AIM or anything like Alcatraz or Mount Rushmore or Remember Wounded Knee, all of these are pushes by the Native American community to gain their rights. We also have the Asian community, and really where we're going to see them dealing with things is the Chinese Exclusion Act, where we will put a quota on how many are allowed to come over, but we are also, and that's going to be with the Quota Act, but we will also make it to where people specifically from China and other Asian regions are not allowed to come over to the United States. We're going to make it very, very difficult for them. After they've done all the work building the Transcontinental Railroad and they need jobs, we're going to tell them, we don't want them taking our jobs. We're afraid they're going to take all our jobs. Don't let any more of them over. And there's a lot of things attached to that, and that is really that nativism mentality that we believe that we're better, that xenophobia, which tells us that our culture is better than other cultures. And this right here is going to be the concept that we deserve to be here in the United States more than anyone else. We have issues going on with women. So far, we've learned about the flappers, which are the girls in the 1920s that are walking around dressed in dresses that are showing their ankles. And they're drinking and smoking and dancing to jazz music and hanging out in speakeasies, which are those, illegal hidden bars, and doing everything that society says that they shouldn't be doing. They're going against those cultural norms. We've also got white ribboners, which are your women who are kind of leading that that movement for voting rights. We have the temperance movement, which is women who are kind of leading the forefront for the movement to make alcohol illegal for prohibition. And we have Title IX, which is really going to be to make sports legal for girls in schools that get federal and state funding, and that is going to be more of this is a modern thing. Hispanics, so far we've talked about repatriation during the Great Depression and New Deal, where we're forcing people of Mexican heritage back to Mexico, and whether they're citizens of the United States or not, because we're afraid they're going to take all the jobs and we need their jobs, so we're going to force them back to Mexico, which again goes against their civil rights. And then we're going to have the African American grouping, which is really going to have more of the things that you have to know about them. African American, the exodusters, which are going to be your old Civil War veterans who are going around helping out your people who are migrating west and into other areas, fighting off Native American attacks and stuff like that. When they do that, that's your Buffalo Soldiers. Your exodusters are going to be the people who are leaving the Deep South to escape discrimination, and the Buffalo Soldiers are your ex-Civil War veterans who are going to be helping them. You also have the Harlem Renaissance is going on in the 1920s when those flapper girls are coming out, and that's that move of all those exodusters who moved into like these areas, around Kansas and stuff, and then the rest of the African Americans that are in the Deep South, they're going to move north to the factory towns. They're going rural to urban, and they're going to go up there for jobs and to escape discrimination. And they're going to see a sense of pride explode, and jazz music is going to come out of it. Artists are going to be playing jazz music, and you're going to have a lot of art and sculptures. Langston Hughes is going to be a very big poetry writer, and that's really going to happen. And we're going to tie the Harlem Renaissance into the Chicano movement, which will take place, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. You will also have the desegregation of the military after World War II with Harry Truman. President Harry Truman will push desegregation in the military. Later on, we'll have a movement for the equal treatment of African Americans in the military, which won't be necessarily supported by Congress, but it will be pushed through anyways. All right, now let's go through our amendments real quick. What do we have for our amendments? First Amendment, free speech, freedom of the press, which is, the media, freedom of religion, and the exercise thereof. Okay, so you can exercise religion, like pray in public and stuff like that. And you also have the right to petition your government, which is also another way of saying that you have the right to protest. Okay. Now, the other amendment that you're going to be tested on really comes in when we talk about the Japanese internment, and that is the Fourth Amendment. And this is the right against unreasonable search and seizure. Okay, so this means that the government can't just come in and look through your things and take them without probable cause, without a warrant, without the things that they have to have in order to do that. 13th through the 15th Amendment, we're going to write free citizens vote. Okay? Slaves get their freedom. They also gain their citizenship, which is important when we talk about the Dred Scott case. So citizenship means that you are afforded the rights, right? You get all of these rights. And then to vote. Male suffrage, 21 and up. Okay. Now, 16th Amendment, federal taxes. 17th Amendment, senators. We vote for them now. Senators are voted in. 18th Amendment, prohibition. Remember the temperance people right here? They make alcohol illegal. All right. The 19th Amendment, women can vote. I always see this test question. How did women gain the right to vote? Was it through protesting? Was it through getting people to sign on in support of it? No, it was through the ratification of the amendment. Okay. 21 is now going to get rid of that pesky 18. So now people who are 21 and up are allowed to drink alcohol. Alcohol is no longer illegal. 24th Amendment, we are going to get rid of poll taxes. Why is that important? We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But hey, you no longer have to pay to vote. I wonder who that helps. Probably your poor people. Now, the 26th Amendment, 18 years and up can vote. You just learned that in your Vietnam unit. If you're going to want us to fight for you, then we should be able to vote who's making these decisions. Let's move on. Okay, so we have these two things going on right now, Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. Real quick, let's just talk about what these two things are, okay? So Civil Rights Act means that you cannot be, you're not supposed to be discriminated against when you're using facilities and stuff like that. So now we can integrate these facilities, okay? So integration, this is a main one, okay? No more whites only or blacks only or anything like that. Everybody can use these facilities, okay? Now, what about Voting Rights Act? Now, there is not discrimination in voting, or at least there's not supposed to be in voting, okay? No more, okay? Write that, no more. Now, but how are these things technically going to take place? There needs to be some kind of governmental oversight. If there's not governmental oversight, what happens? Why do these things have trouble taking place? Well, if voting rights is supposed to take away literacy exams, and it's supposed to take away poll taxes, remember that's your 24th Amendment here, but groups like the KKK or the Congressional Bloc of Southern Democrats are keeping that from happening. Southern Democrats like George Wallace, if they're keeping this from happening, then these things are going to have a hard time taking place. We can put laws in all we want. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to take place. We can scare people from voting, right? We can put burning crosses in their yard. We can stand a bunch of members in the KKK with their white hoods and everything in front of the voting booth, and that scares people from voting. And that fear makes it to where they don't have the right to vote technically, right? They're scared to do so, and for good reason. They've seen what can happen, right? And then the Congressional Bloc of Southern Democrats is a bunch of white supremacist congressional members. These are people who were voted into office. These are your House representatives, your senators, things like that, who are Southern Democrats. And at this time, Southern Democrats are going to be your people who are for segregation. They are going to be some white supremacists. And so they now can vote in legislation that is going to go against certain members of the United States, specifically your minorities. Okay? Like George Wallace. He is a huge segregationalist. See if I spell that right? I don't know. Okay. So how are we going to make these things happen? Specific groups are going to come together. So how are we going to defeat these issues, right? How are we going to continue to push for change in the government to help us with these issues like the Congressional Bloc of Southern Democrats, people like George Wallace or the KKK, or people like Orville Faubus, who is going to make it really hard for the Little Rock Nine to integrate into the high school. Okay? How are we going to make this possible? How can we get this kind of stuff going on? We have to get people in leadership that are going to help us, like President Eisenhower, who is going to use the National Guard to allow the protection of these 9 high school students so that they can go to school. Okay? We're going to use police officers to protect students trying to integrate into school. Students like Ruby Bridges, who is that 6-year-old trying to get into school, and people are using black baby dolls in coffins and throwing things at her and yelling things at the poor girl while she's trying to get into school. So these are the normal ways that we know of that we can use our leaders. There are some people in leadership that can help us. There are police officers who are willing to do their job and help this take place. But what else do we have? We have civil disobedience and we have violence with violence. There's specific groups of people who are going to be a part of making sure these kinds of things take place. So civil disobedience is most often associated with MLK, Martin Luther King. I Have a Dream, March on Washington, Selma. Okay? Now, it's also going to be associated with Rosa Parks. Remember, I'm not giving up my seat. Okay, so these two are technically, they are connected to the Southern Christian Conference. And this is a group of people who are looking for ways to push back, to protest what's going on. Government, we need more action. We need more support through civil disobedient means, okay? So MLK is your easier to digest Baptist preacher, civil disobedience, nonviolent protesting, direct action kind of guy. And he's a lot easier for the white community to digest. But there is another need, and that is the person who's willing to call a spade, and that is the violence with violence. And we are going to know this as Malcolm X, and we are going to also know it as the Black Panther Party. Now, unfortunately, people tend to think that it's a yin and a yang, like, or I'm sorry, that it's the bad and the good. That MLK is the good and Malcolm X is the bad, and that's not the case. It's really that yin and yang concept. They work together. They're both needed to push forward the change that needs to happen during the historic civil rights era. Okay, so your Black Panther Party is going to be set up in communities like a military there to protect the people from incoming violence. And then MLK is going to be your person that is pushing out that let's get along kind of. One day I see black and white children playing together in schools. He's going to be that person, right? So both of them are needed in order to start the change that is really needed to take root in the United States. So we're also going to have your freedom riders, who are people who are riding in on buses, and they're going to go in and make sure that things like the Civil Rights Act are taking place, making sure that they can sit in a diner and be served. And this is what we're going to call sit-ins. Sit-ins are refusing to leave until you are served, okay? And that is a part of that nonviolent protest, but taking direct action, going into the problem and refusing to move. Now, we are going to talk about some important SCOTUS cases in just a minute, but I want to get into the Hispanic movement, and I want to get into women and what's taking place right now. And one of the people that we're going to cover is Thurgood Marshall in just a minute. I'm mentioning this because he is a person that we are focused on with regard to the African American civil rights. He is going to be a lawyer, and he's really important for what's. All right, so let's get through some major people and groups. Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, they are going to be focused on migrant workers' rights. They are going to strike, and they are going to go outside of the farm area, and they're going to go into the city, and they're going to strike in the city, and they're going to start up a union. And it is going to be the National Farm Workers. I was going to say Association. National Farm Workers. National Farm Workers of America. And they are going to fight for rights and safe working. And, because they're messing with a lot of chemicals out there, they're really going to be fighting for the rights of the migrant worker while they're out there. Dolores is also going to be focusing on the female Hispanics and their plight and what they have to go through. The Chicano movement is really going to be focused on an explosion of pride. So I told you, when we talked about the Harlem Renaissance with the African Americans and that explosion of pride, we are also going to have the similar thing with the Chicano movement. So before in the 1920s, we talked about Mexican muralism. Mexican muralism was people from Mexican citizens coming over and painting political murals. But in the historic civil rights era, we will have the Chicano movement, which is the Chicano muralism, which is really focused on cultural paintings. Okay, you'll have artists that are musicians, you'll have poetry and things like that, and a lot of books written, but the real focus here is the muralism. So cultural painting, really focusing on the cultural aspect of what it meant to be Hispanic at this time frame. And we're really looking at places like San Diego and San Francisco that have these murals painted in areas like under overpasses and stuff like that. So when you see a picture of a painting like that, it's the Chicano movement, and it's muralism. Some other things that are going to come out during this time is going to be the LA walkouts, and these are going to be high school students who walk out of the school, and they're protesting discrimination from their teachers and stuff in the school. Okay. Now, Japanese internment, we already talked about. The Executive Order 9066 is going to push Japanese citizens here in the United States into camps. And it's going to go directly against their fourth, right? Because there was no warranted search and seizure. There was no proof that any of these people were spies. So it was going to go against their Fourth and their 14th Amendment, which means all of their rights were ignored because they're citizens of the United States. They're going to go with it thinking that maybe this will help, things will be good, but when they get out, all of their stuff is ransacked. They have nothing left. And so the United States will issue reparations during Reagan's administration, but they will also issue another formal apology during Bill Clinton's administration, and I believe this test question's, I think it's 1995 or 96 when that happens, and it'll be during Clinton's administration. Both test questions. This is a test question. This and this are all test questions, okay? Betty Friedan, she is a feminist. This is really where we first kind of see that feminist concept. And she is going to write the book, The Feminine Mystique. She's pretty much saying men don't know what women want. This is what women want. This is the kind of life they want. Some women don't want children. Some women want to work. She's going to be for equal rights, equal pay, for women to be treated correctly. And this book is going to spark kind of that new feminist movement that we saw really take off in the late 1960s, early 1970s. Sandra Day O'Connor is the first female Supreme Court judge. Okay, Sonia Sotomayor is the first Hispanic Supreme Court judge. Okay, if they ever ask you who's from Texas, we know for sure this is the first female Supreme Court judge from Texas. Sonia is tested on being the first Hispanic Supreme Court judge. Hillary Clinton is tested on mostly being the Secretary of State. But remember, Hillary Clinton was also the First Lady because she was married to President Bill Clinton. Okay, so Bill Clinton's wife. Title IX, again, we talked about that. This means girls can now have sports in school, and there cannot be discrimination with regard to funds in schools. Discrimination is a no-no in schools that get state and federal funding. Okay, now we're going to go into a little bit more and then we will be done. Okay, so let's talk about the American Indian movement. I had briefly mentioned them at the beginning. So Alcatraz, this is going to be the precedent for all AIM action that's going to come, and it lasts from November 1969 to June of 1971. So it is going to take a very long time, and it's slowly going to dwindle. People are going to give up, really led by younger members of the AIM movement, the youth. The older teenagers. Wounded Knee occupation is going to be a 71-day occupation of the site of Wounded Knee. 2 natives are going to be killed, an FBI agent is wounded, and the U.S. Marshal is wounded, and it's really going to hurt the movement. Anytime violence ends up with people hurt, it hurts the movement. So these are really the 2 things that you need to know about AIM. School/religion cases, then we are going to get into some other civil rights cases that are going to talk about some other things, some other rights. So I have them listed in such a way because we're going to hop around. Okay, so Dred Scott v. Sanford is not necessarily it is not an education case, but I have it listed here because we're going to, if we didn't have this case really kind of setting the ball rolling for understanding citizenship in the United States, then we wouldn't be able to have the conversation of equality with regard to citizenship in the United States. So Dred Scott v. Sanford is really a case that's focused on if I'm a free man, so if I am a free man living in a free state, then if I go to a slave state, I should still retain my freedom because I am a citizen, and therefore all of the rights, all of those rights that we talked about right at the beginning, all those rights are I get also, which means that I retain my citizenship and the rights thereof everywhere. So you can't enslave me because I am a citizen, because I live in a free state. Now the ruling for this one is going to be that you are not a citizen because you are an African American who was or had ancestors that were brought over to the United States. So you're not a citizen, so therefore you don't get that citizenship, those citizenship rights, okay? And so just because you're a free man in this state does not mean that you're a free man in another state. And of course, this is an important case because at this time, free men in free states are being stolen and taken over to slave states and kept in slavery. So very, very important case leading into equality with regard to citizenship, because at this point now, we have the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment passed. So African Americans and all other minorities are free citizens, and therefore they have the right to vote if they're male. They have the right to go to school. All of these things are taking place here in the United States. But we'll have Plessy v. Ferguson, who wants to know, should African Americans be able to go to school with white Americans? Is that a part of their rights? Plessy v. Ferguson is going to argue that as far as the 14th Amendment is concerned, we can still achieve equality through separate but equal means. So they're going to say that separate but equal is constitutional. Okay? So this means that they are for segregation. Okay? So segregation, just out. We are not together. We are segregated, okay? Now, after this case is ruled on later on, we're going to jump over here to Mendez v. Westminster, who, by the way, Thurgood Marshall, he is initially a lawyer, and he is going to be one of the lawyers on this case. Remember, one of the words that we associate with lawyers is counsel. So I'm going to put counsel right here, okay? So he is, I don't think I spelled that right. I think it's counsel. Anyways, counsel. Lawyer, counsel, okay? Now, Mendez v. Westminster is going to rule that Hispanic children can go to school with white children, okay? So now we have the first case, now major case that's saying we are integrating, okay? Remember, Plessy v. Ferguson, we have segregated. Mendez v. Westminster, we are integrating, okay? So I'm going to write integration right here. Now, this case is important because it sets the precedent, okay? The precedent. Precedent means that it is going to set the standard for all cases to come that are dealing with similar concepts. Now, if Mendez v. Westminster is dealing with the concept of integration versus segregation in schools, then it is therefore the precedent for Brown v. Board that is also dealing with a case over integration versus segregation in schools. This is for Hispanic children with whites. This is for African American children with whites. Now, hello. Well, Thurgood Marshall, he is here. He's a lawyer counsel for here. He is also the same for here. Okay. Now, Brown v. Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas, is also going to rule now that separate but equal, it is not constitutional because it is inherently unequal. And so, therefore, African American children can go to school with whites. And of course, that's why we end up with the issues like Ruby Bridges and the Little Rock Nine trying to go to school, and there being backlash because the not all American citizens are on board with the ruling. Of course, the ruling is going to take time to implement, which is why we need to get that congressional block out, why we need to vote in good people who are going to support the movement of this, okay? Why we need that nonviolent and violent with violence approach. So they can go to school with white children, okay? Now, this right here is pretty much saying, remember, separate is inherently, don't know how to spell that, inherently unequal, okay? It is not constitutional. It is unequal. It is unconstitutional. Now we are going to move on. We have Tinker v. Des Moines. You just learned about this when we were studying the Vietnam War. This is pretty much saying that 18 and up have the right, or I'm sorry, I'm going off on I'm going off on the 26th Amendment. Anyways, which is, you know, should consider the fact that the 26th Amendment is a civil rights case, you know, because having the right to vote, 18 and up can vote. Okay. Now, Tinker v. Des Moines, though, this is about the students who are wearing the black armbands in order to protest the Vietnam War. And the ruling is that students do not lose their rights when they go into school. And students and staff, I should write that there too. Teachers do not either. Do not lose their rights when they enter the school grounds. The only issue here is that it cannot be a distraction. It cannot be lewd. So if you're wondering, well, if this is the case, then why are schools allowed to have dress codes? It's because it cannot be lewd, it cannot be crude, it cannot be a distraction. Now we're going to go over here to, or actually before we go to Wisconsin v. Yoder, I want to state here that Chief Justice Warren, he is the presiding judge over these cases. He is very well known. It is going to be Chief Justice Warren. It is his court. He'll make a statement on it. You'll see a question with him. If you ever see his name, Chief Justice Warren, you know we're talking about one of these cases. Now, Wisconsin v. Yoder is a religious exercise case, really. But the importance of Wisconsin v. Yoder is the idea that the Amish children do not have to go to school. They do not have to attend, and they're going to use the word compulsory. So they do not have to attend compulsory education after 8th grade. So after 8th grade, they are allowed to stay home and be in their community and work with their community. Their community believes that after 8th grade, these children are becoming adults. They need to take part in the community and the religious aspects that they believe, which is kind of separating themselves from the rest of the United States. And so that's kind of the concept there. So we're going to get into the last few cases, and then we'll be know his rights, okay? So, or what if he didn't know his rights? Well, then he has no idea that he has the right to counsel. He has no idea that he doesn't have to speak, right? So these are the things that if you grow up here or if you are aware of these things, you know them. If there's a language barrier, you may be very easy to convince to sign that you're guilty when you didn't do something because you don't know that you have the rights that you have. Okay, so Escobedo v. Illinois, Miranda v. Arizona, Hernandez v. Texas, they are all cases to make sure that somebody has a fair trial. They have a fair process through the whole thing. They have a fair process, and the process starts with the right to know your rights. Now, Escobedo v. Illinois is going to be the next process. You have the right to counsel. So you have the right to a lawyer. Remember, this is counsel to a lawyer during interrogation. You have the right to a lawyer during interrogation. So when they got you in and they're grilling you and they're trying to say that you did something, you have the right to say, I want a lawyer, and that you don't have to talk. And one of the ones that I forgot to write up here, sorry guys, is Gideon v. Wainwright. And this is going to be the case that says you have a right to a lawyer. All people have the right to a lawyer. Okay, now let's move this back down. Hernandez v. Texas is going to be the most important case coming off the line here, because now we're moving into the courtroom, and you have the right to a jury of your peers. Now, why does that have anything to do? So when Hernandez was put on trial, he had a jury of nothing but white jury members. Now, Hernandez is not white. Hernandez is Hispanic. At this time, white and Hispanic were considered one grouping. Okay, so technically, the court could get away with having a full white jury, and that has nothing to do with you, right? Like if you're coming over, let's say you're immigrating into the United States, you speak a different language, you're trying to find work for your family and stuff like that. So you have all these things that you're having to deal with, and you inherently are dealing with discrimination at this time frame in Texas. So we know that this is a process that these people are dealing with, and the white community is not dealing with that. So they don't really understand the issues that Hernandez would be going through at this time. And so it is important to note that the different groups would not, like, you can't group them together. They're not the same. They have different experiences and stuff like that, just simply because of their racial grouping and because of their race and their ethnicity and things like that. So this will be the case that separates the two. And so now white and Hispanic are two separate groups. And that's why this case is so important. Okay. Now these are all your cases and everything that you need to know for civil rights. I know it's a lot. I know it's a lot, but it's really important that you try really hard to memorize as much as you can to make those critical connections that you need to make, especially with this unit. It is your second most tested unit on the STAR, okay? And your STAR is April 26th, okay? That is when you'll be taking your STAR, so you have to have all this information down if you want to have zero issues with graduating next year. See y'all next time.